Good morning, everybody. Well, it's already the last morning. How sad. Santa Fe is so wonderful. Hope you guys have been enjoying yourselves and enjoying the conference and all the things that Santa Fe has to offer in the afternoons and evenings. This morning, I'm happy to introduce Dr. Ralph Kiernan. Dr. Ralph Kiernan is a clinical neuropsychologist with over 50 years of experience. He developed the Cognizstat assessment tool and has a long-standing interest in the psychological depth of William Blake's writings and illustrations. Dr. Kiernan is presenting this morning on William Blake, visionary poet, artist, and the psychology of consciousness. If you'd like to read more about him, you can look at his bio on the online information that we have. And won't you please welcome Dr. Kiernan.
Good morning. My wife Joan and I have been coming to this conference a long time. And when Richard Cogan talked about his first performances here in 2000, I have a feeling we were both here, but it's nice to be back as a presenter. And it's especially nice to be back talking about William Blake. It is so easy to miss this man, miss what he has to offer. And it took a series of miracles, I think, to even have his existence known to us today. This is a man who didn't have mass printings of his books available. He did them by hand, each and every one. They weren't particularly popular books, with the possible exception of the Songs of Innocence and Experience. His books were obscure. They were sometimes controversial, argumentative. Obscure, though, is the right word for many of his books. He was trying to do something for which there were no terms or words available. And so he made up his own characters. He made up his own mythology. And the mythology kept growing and expanding as he went. Now, I'm not a Blake scholar. I won't pretend to be. I'm someone who encountered Blake and was, I suppose, permanently altered in the process. And this was 40 years ago. So I read Blake, I collected some stuff, I pursued it as far as I could possibly have the patience for. And I say that because as you get into Blake's more, what are called his prophetic works or his illuminated books, they're really hard to read. As you read them, you're not clear what he's talking about or who these characters are or why there's so many of them. What is his point? Why are these quarreling all the time? And what's the reconciliation he's going for? And does he ever find it? If you're a scholar and you stay with it, you can figure some of this out, and people have published this. But during his lifetime, there was almost no one who was that far along in his system. So his legacy rested on a handful of people who recognized something extraordinary in him and decided it was really important to keep this alive. So today we have all of his works available, except for the ones that were burned because they were revolutionary or lost to neglect. But there were enough people, friends, colleagues, other artists, almost all within the artist community, who kept him alive. And that's why we have him today. He did not help the process by remaining so obscure. So this talk today is not going to be some scholarly lecture about Blake. What I'd like to do is have you gain enough interest and curiosity to individually pursue this man a little further on your own. And if I can give you that, then I think I've accomplished my task. But in doing that, I should talk about the new psychology of consciousness, because that's mine. And I've been working on it for, 40 years. And it is, you could look at it, you could read it, you could know William Blake, and you might come away thinking, this has nothing to do with Blake. It's certainly what I thought until I finished it and took a look. And I thought, it incorporates my own scientific imagination based from my years of work as a neuropsychologist. But it also includes poems that I was writing around the text, and it includes art that my wife Joan has done. And you may notice that even though I practiced in the Palo Alto area as Dr. Kiernan for my entire career, this book that I'm going to show, I won't talk about today, but that I've finished, is Margolies-Kiernan, which is my married joint name, and it's under both our names, Joan and Ralph. So let's get on with this and talk about this guy. Since in the years from Blake's time to ours, there's little stepping stones, okay? Wordsworth was a contemporary of William Blake. So he actually was reading some of William Blake at the same time that Blake was alive. And he brings up this creativity and madness theme right in this bottom quote. For Wordsworth, there's no doubt this poor man was mad. But despite that, Wordsworth was pulled in, and I recently had occasion to read his Intimations of Immortality, which is one of his more famous poems, and it's pure William Blake from beginning to end. I should say some words about the madness of William Blake. Blake lived the most ordinary life. He was an engraver. He illustrated other people's books and made a living that way. There was nothing extraordinary about his life in the sense of being mad. He had friendships. He had people who patronized his work. He was a hardworking man, very dedicated. But he did have visions, and he drew from those visions in terms of his visual art and in terms of his writing and thinking. And his visions were not just, idle sort of fantasies. These were, for him, very real as the rest of his life. But as far as being a source of madness or disturbance, not at all. He drew from them for much of his creative originality. I recently read that Carl Jung talked about William Blake as someone who spent more time in the collective unconscious than anyone he had ever encountered, and came out okay. And so Blake is kind of a puzzle. He's a puzzle in terms of what he produced, his writings. He's a puzzle in terms of his visions. He's a puzzle in terms of whether he was in the collective unconscious or not, but he certainly dwelt in places that most of us don't go most of the time. And people certainly thought of him as mad during his lifetime, not mad enough to try to put him away, but eccentric and kind of crazy, just as Wordsworth does here. But if we come a little closer to the current time, we see that Yeats, as a teenage boy, was blown away by William Blake. He encountered Blake. He had the subtlety of mind and intellect to understand this was something extraordinary. And this is a quote from him. The spray of an inexhaustible fountain of beauty blown into his face. And he dedicated a great deal of his working life to William Blake, trying to put together a complete set of Blake's works, which had never been done before because no one had ever incorporated a piece called the Four Zoas, which was only written in manuscript form and never published, but is probably the single most important transitional piece of Blake's life. So Yeats was someone who recognized, I think probably fully, the extraordinary nature of William Blake, and spent much of the rest of his life enthralled to it. And then we have T.S. Eliot, more modern, looking at Blake. Not a wild man, not a wild pet for the elite to be interested in, but there's a peculiarity in William Blake, and it's in Eliot's hands, a peculiar honesty. And I want to show you a poem, and I'll read it to you, that I think captures that. This is called The Fly, and it's from the Songs of Experience. Little fly, thy summer's play, my thoughtless hand has brushed away. Am not I a fly like thee, or art not thou a man like me? For I dance and drink and sing till some blind hand shall brush my wing. If thought is life and strength and breath, and the want of thought is death, then am I a happy fly if I live or if I die. Now, when you read that poem, you're puzzled. First time, it has that peculiarity, but it also has an essential honesty in it that's, you could spend a lifetime just reading this poem and trying to digest what it is he's saying here and how deep do I go with it. Am I really a happy fly? So let me just say a little bit about the songs of experience. I call William Blake the first psychologist because I see him as an astute observer of human behavior in a way that most of us don't measure up. I mean, after all, how many psychologists do you know who simply focused on the transition that every single one of us goes through in life from the stage of innocence to the stage of experience? Now, if that isn't a profound transition that affects everyone and is psychological, if it's anything, then nothing is. And so here's the puzzle. What's going on here? What happens to the innocence? And why do we pervert so often the realm that we enter in experience? How do we get so lost? And this was a puzzle that first he articulates in the Songs of Innocence and Experience, and then, in my opinion, works on the entire rest of his life. And it's a hard puzzle to solve. Psychology is a behavioral science, for sure. But you know, we're much better at descriptive psychology than we are predictive psychology. In fact, we can feel very clever in our descriptions and define syndromes and all of this, but boy, the minute someone wants to know what happens next, where does this person go who is a narcissist, and do they go into despair, or do they go into a prideful state, or are they just simply successful? We're not good at experience. And if you ever sat down as a psychologist and tried to analyze how a certain personality type will have children, and the children are responding to this personality, and what are their options, and who do they become, and it gets mind-boggling very fast, and it did for William Blake, which is why he never published The Four Zoas. He never imagined it was such a hard task when he started. Let's go on. Here's William Blake. He lived 1757 to 1827, 70 years, in or around London. He is self-educated. His only education was drawing school and then engraving apprentice. He ordinarily, if you were an artisan and you didn't have formal education, it wouldn't mean anything. But for William Blake, he was reading people. He was reading Newton. He was reading Locke. He was trying to see what he could make out of Francis Bacon's essays, and responding to all these. And it was a self-selected higher education. And I think Blake's intellect must have been extraordinary. So I think it made a difference that he was self-educated. He didn't have to sort of fit into the system. He read what he wanted. He read what made sense, or what he wanted to work on. He married a humble woman and lived a modest life the rest of his life. never had success, although he tried for it. He didn't have the knack for it, and he wasn't kind to people who had told him what he should be doing. So if it weren't for the young artists that he drew to himself as he went along, he would be unknown today. There's an interesting paradox, I think, surrounding Carl Jung, and I haven't solved it. I haven't tried to really very much. But, imagine you're a treasure hunter and you come upon a treasure chest hidden in a deep cave that no one else knows about. And it's just what you've been looking for your whole life. Do you tell anyone about it, or do you just draw from it and use it? My prejudice is that Jung drew from Blake enormously. And although he sometimes mentioned Blake, he held Blake at more than an arm's length. And sometimes some of the Jung's followers would come up to him and say, there's a lot of William Blake in what you're doing. And he would say, I'm no Blakean. And at other times he would say, well, Blake is tantalizing, but he always called him the poet. One of the curiosities as I was doing my stuff, and I swear I was not doing this in relationship to William Blake in my conscious awareness. I decided I'd see if I could develop some ideas about personality. So I turned to Carl Jung, who is the guy you go to in psychology around personality. And I'm reading where he's talking about introversion and extroversion. And there's a little footnote. And the footnote says, the poet was not wrong. And I'm thinking, the poet was not wrong? And so he gives a reference, and it's to The Marriage of Heaven and Hell by Blake. Not only was the poet not wrong, he lays out the whole thing in about a single paragraph, and with a depth, I think that for me, the terms introversion and extroversion don't come close to. So this is my thing with Blake. I call what I did with him an encounter because I never pursued it far. I got frustrated with this mythology of his. I didn't feel like trying to figure out what he's talking about. And he was not helpful. And I was trying to do a new psychology. My idea was that consciousness is simply a behavioral function with the actual action inhibited. And we have that ability in the brain system to inhibit actions that we formulate. It's a great talent. And I thought, this is something I need to pursue. I used intuition, which I feel like was based on all of my clinical work more than anything else. When I put it together, I saw this similarity in form to Blake's illuminated books, and I made a joke to a friend of mine, said, I have my own illuminated book. But then I started thinking, well, wait a minute, is there more to this book of William Blake than just form? And I saw content all over the place. So I see ourselves as physiological individuals who engage the world in our own personal idiosyncratic ways. Reason is tied to sensation and identification and recognition. and what I call the structures of experience, which is simply the changes we make to the brain through experience. However, William Blake calls this the mundane shell, because we create these structures and they're all wedded to the past. How do we move forward beyond this shell of repetition? Well, for Blake, it was the passions, desire. For me, I formulated this concept of visceral processes. These are all the inputs from the body systems that direct us towards doing what we want, serving our needs. But when they flow freely, for me, they lead us toward authentically original responses, which are connected to what William Blake called the poetic genius. And then the last part is introversion, extroversion. We encounter reality either freely from one moment to the next, led by visceral guidance, and that's what Blake called the prolific, or we're guided by recognition and the structures of experience, which is devouring. We impose our structural framework of what the world's about on everything we see. Those are the two modes that William Blake talked about, and they roughly correspond to introversion and extroversion. So I'm going to show some William Blake stuff as we go through it, and I'll show them with pictures from the book that goes with it. And when I show some of my own stuff that's related to it, I'm going to use pictures of my wife's art that I'm using in the book. So here's the first one. I'm going to read it because, I think it's just the loveliest expression of what Blake meant by innocence. It's called The Echoing Green. The sun does arise and make happy the skies. The merry bells ring to welcome the spring. The skylark and thrush, the birds of the bush, sing louder around to the bell's cheerful sound, while our sports shall be seen on the echoing green. Old John with white hair does laugh away care, sitting under the oak among the old folk. They laugh at our play, and soon they all say, such were the joys we all, girls and boys, in our youth time were seen on the echoing green. Till the little ones weary, no more can be merry. The sun doth descend, and our sports have an end. Round the laps of our mothers, many sisters and brothers, like birds in their nest, are ready for rest. And sport no more seen on the echoing green. To me, that's just it. That's what Blake meant by innocence. And for me, it's the perceptual tier of consciousness. The perceptual tier is what we all physically encounter in the world. It doesn't have names and labels. It's unvoiced, it's felt, it's experienced. We don't control it. We respond to it. And we have innocence because we're just responding to the world as it is given to us. And there's something joyful about it, but it's not always happy. Sometimes it has its sad moments and tragedies, but it's a world beyond our control. It's the world of innocence. This is from experience, and often people, even people with pretty good educations, this is the only thing they ever learn about William Blake, the Tiger poem. And it's a great poem. I'll read it. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when the heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer, what the chain? In what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the Lamb make thee? Tiger, tiger burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? So this is somehow in the world of experience, and it's powerful and frightening even. What's this poem really about? What's Blake trying to say in this poem? It's not that obvious just reading the poem and enjoying it. We all know tigers are fierce. Is that the point of the poem? Look at this tiger. This is a fierce tiger? I can't point it. It's something strange about this piece. I culled these 5 pieces from William Blake. One law for the lion and the ox is oppression. Every man's wisdom is peculiar to his individuality. Reason alone creates mind-forged manacles. The road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom. One portion of being is the prolific, the other the devouring. These are essentially psychological premises about being in the world. And they're strongly stated, mostly in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, which if you had to read only one book of Blake's, I would recommend that one because it's a doozy. I see consciousness as behavioral. I see visceral inputs from the body and sensory inputs from the world guiding our responses, the behavioral responses we generate. And I see those accumulating structures of experience in the brain. And all those are increased probabilities of responding in specific ways that we've used in the past. The problem with the structures of experience is they're wedded to the past. Here's the tiger poem. So now we know the answer, don't we? One law for the lion and the ox is oppression. What happens if we try to do that? We get a little lion lamb, a tiger lamb, some strange, ironic contrivance of the two beasts in one, as if we could do this to the real tiger. So this is the marriage of heaven and hell. Anyone who's a Swedenborgian will know that Swedenborg wrote Heaven and Hell. That was one of his major works. And so Blake, who initially was interested very strongly in Swedenborg because Swedenborg had visions, also came up against some things he didn't like. He tried to correct that by marrying heaven and hell in this particular book. So here God, the infinite in all things, acts only through individuals. And because spirit or God or imagination or creativity can only act through the individual, the poetic genius is filtered through the weaknesses and limitations of every individual. Blake came up with this idea of specters and emanations. The specter is the reasoning power, emanations are the spiritual forces inside. And this part on the left-hand side shows that the reasoning power in man locks us into the ratio of things of memory. In other words, the things we've already recognized in the world, if we're just using reason alone, can only be compared and contrasted and so on. And they can't create something new, something original. You know, I didn't read Wittgenstein's Tractatus. I wasn't drawn to it, but I did look at it. And I came across logic tables. And I'm not a great academician about logic tables, never studied it. But I noticed that Wittgenstein called them tautologies. And I'm sitting there just blown away by this because I had never thought about it that way before. And that's exactly what Blake is saying here. He's saying the things of memory, the ratios of the things we've already identified, lock us in to a shell, mind-forged manacles. So, not that long ago, maybe 5 years ago, I saw a British movie about a man who has an affair with his wife's sister. Actually falls in love with his wife's sister. And it's a very nice movie, but I can't tell you the name of it. Certain skills are lost with age. But the main character was preoccupied with this poem on the right of William Blake's, which was never published in his lifetime. It was written in his manuscript book. I'll read just the first and the last stanza. My specter around me night and day, like a wild beast, guards my way. My emanation far within weeps incessantly for my sin. And then it ends with, and throughout all eternity, I forgive you, you forgive me. As our dear Redeemer said, this is the wine and this is the bread. Blake was not big on the Old Testament, the rule of law. He was vehemently opposed because that's one law, which is oppression. But he was pretty big on Jesus. And for him, Jesus is summed up almost exclusively with the word forgiveness, which was interesting. I watched the talk yesterday on forgiveness. This poem sort of captures that struggle we all have and the constant need every one of us has for forgiveness, received and given. Here he's talking about the specter's pursuit of emanations. And this is from his illuminated book, Milton. Again, it's the specter chasing or constraining emanation. But then the last two lines really struck me. They have sort of relevance, I think, for today. The idiot reasoner laughs at the man of imagination, and from laughter proceeds to murder by undervaluing calumny. That is an extraordinary phrase. proceeds to murder by undervaluing calumny. But this is William Blake. The man has so much profound thought, and sometimes it's condensed into the littlest statements. So this is from me, and with one of my wife Joan's pieces. And on the left-hand side, I talk about Gibson's affordances. J.J. Gibson was a Cornell professor of perception, actually the leading expert on perception in the world, until he came up with his theory of affordances, which people didn't like because it wasn't what they're used to thinking about. Essentially, he's an action-based man who thinks we generate the world we see by developing skills that allow us to access or see those things. It's a critical idea. And now, I apologize to Peter Sloterdijk. His last name is D-I-J-K, and I have it screwed up there on the slide. But he has a foam metaphor. The world is not a perfect circle, nor is it a bubble that surrounds us. It's foam. It goes in all kinds of strange shapes and directions depending on what we're interested in, what we're exploring, how many of the affordances we develop into the world that surrounds us, so that the world we create is a personal achievement, dependent entirely on how much we do, how much we engage it. It's foam. So here's the marriage of heaven and hell. Here's Blake sort of upset with people who restrain their own feelings and give over to reason's constraints. Here's the next page in that book, and interesting quote that many people have observed since on Milton writing at liberty when he speaks of the devil, because in Blake's mind, he's a true poet. Here are the proverbs of hell. This is what Blake likes to do. There were 41 of them given in the marriage of heaven and hell. This is 10 that I've picked out. Blake likes to throw things upside down and challenge you, and he does this with these proverbs of hell. I'm going more quickly because I've used up so much time. Here's the mind-forward manacles. This is your reason, which is a little play on the word your reason. And this is what happens when reason takes over. The world stands still and we repeat the same dull round over and over again. And the vegetable ratio is all the fallen senses can perceive. The fallen senses are the sensory inputs that fuel reason's work in the absence of the poetic genius. Here's me and Joan. And here are my two tiers. The perceptual tier, which I believe many animal species possess, but it's unvoiced, it's physical. It's the physical presence of the world that we all have. It's continuous and it grounds us. Verbal symbolic is abstracted from it. It's the things we identify and recognize and name. Without the verbal symbolic realm, we don't do creative work. It may throw us into the world of experience and out of the world of innocence, but it gives us the power of creativity. We define how the world is, and we can refine those definitions as we go. That's the nature of science. I think I've said all this. For Blake, energy is eternal delight. And he likes this, and this is right out of J.J. Gibson. What is now proved was only once imagined. We have to learn to see the world. We develop skills to see the world. These are physical skills. They're not some intellectual abstraction. They're ways of physically engaging the world. You can't make an atomic bomb, not that that's a great thing, but you can't do it without physically engaging. It's not just on mathematical equations. Without the poetic or prophetic character, the philosophic and experimental stands still in Blake's mind. And this, for me, is the visceral processes of the body. They ensure that our actions serve our interests, not too shocking, and they remain hidden from consciousness. Most of the visceral sources are not, they're not articulated, they're not named, they're not easily identified. And this allows visceral processes to have a bit of free play, which is, for me, is the basis of creativity. Here's the prolific and the devouring. And on the page from the book, he calls the giants who formed the world into its structural existence and now seem to live in it are the causes of life and all activity. But he sees these two types, devourer and the prolific, as the two classes of men who are enemies, but who each contribute to the progress of life on earth. Here I call them in the moment and in the head. The visceral processes, because they're hidden from conscious awareness, they're not identifiable so easily, keep us in the moment, and they can have a free play of connectedness in the perceptual tier of consciousness. And for me, that's the source of creativity. In the head are the structures based on what we have already identified and recognized. I think I've said all of these, but I should point out that Blake believed that the soul is not separate from the body, and it's only expressed through the body. So there was no separate soul for him. In his later years, the last 5 years of his life, he did this series of engravings for the book of Job. And it's lovely because it's Blake's interpretation of the book of Job. And it's not exactly how the book of Job gives it. Job is punished because he's a false charitable source. He's being charitable because he's supposed to be. He's doing the right thing, but for the wrong reasons. Interestingly enough, once again, in his later life, Carl Jung had to try to solve the problem of Job. Was that a coincidence? Who knows? And here's the last thing Blake did. These illustrations for the book of Dante, for Dante's book of the Divine Comedy. I don't know whether it's 100 or 102. My two lines don't line up. But I do know they're the most extraordinary illustrations for Dante's work you will ever see. And in my mind, they're also the best thing Blake ever did. And this is Francesca de Rimini, that wonderful circle of hell for the lustful extramarital lovers. And here's the end. I think I followed Blake's advice in the last two lines. I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's. But I also was victim to the first part. I took the end of this golden string that he gave me 40 years ago, and I wound up at my own heaven's gate. So that's it for today. Thank you.
I spent a year as a trainee at the Jung Institute studying with Edward Edinger. We plowed through the entire Old Testament. And I remember Ed, as he presented a number of Blake's images, saying that Blake's work are a treasure chest of archetypal imagery. To present William Blake here, sir, is audacious, courageous. You did it. Thank you for bringing this treasure chest and opening it for us. It was just great.
Thank you.
My name is Rue Whitaker, and I'm from California. And I also want to thank you very much for this presentation. I've always loved Blake, but I, of course, haven't delved into him as much as you have. But I wonder, considering when he lived, is he kind of like a canary in the coal mine for the industrial and post-Enlightenment thinking that has made us even more shut down in our heads? And I wonder if you've thought about that. He's not the only one. There are others who had to say how much we've lost in this, how cut off we are from the perceptual world that is available, the innocence that's all around us, that perhaps ancient peoples were more in touch with when they were more connected to the earth. And I wonder if you think, from your experience in the field of psychotherapy and psychology, what do we need to do to open up?
Blake was a product of his time. As a young man, he witnessed two remarkable revolutions, the French Revolution and the American Revolution. And he also witnessed the tragedy of industrialization. So yes, he's responding to both things in everything he's doing. And he's not the canary in the coal mine, because all of these supportive people carried his work forward.
Hello. I'm Jean Goodwin, Galveston, Texas. I wondered if it's true that Blake and his wife spent time up in a tree. I also wondered if you had thought about the connections between Blake and Lacan in terms of the importance of desire.
There ought to be a connection between William Blake and Lacan. It's quite amusing that you're asking, because just the other day, I mean literally the other day, a day or two ago, I decided I would see if I could Google it. I couldn't find anything easily, and I don't know if there's a connection or not. And I've lost track of the first question the first question you posed, so I can't really address that. I can't.
She is asking if they lived in trees.
I can't hear anything yet.
If they had ever lived in a tree.
Oh, you know, when Blake was a young man, the story goes, he saw a tree filled with angels and came home so excited and told his father about it. His father gave him a beating. That's the only tree story I know about William Blake. Thank you.